We're standing at a fork in the road. The next 5 years will define the future, not just for business, but for our planet, our portfolios, and our kids. Hi, my name is Gib Hedstrom, author of a new book titled Navigating Sustainable Growth, a roadmap for boards and corporate leaders. The book is a call to action for how companies can thrive by simply following McKinsey advice. Look out 5 to 7 years and ask, how can we outsmart our competitors? Sounds simple? It's not. And it's very different from any time in the past. Why? Because the climate is calling, not metaphorically, literally. We know that fossil fuels are cooking the planet. The data is irrefutable. That's why the book includes a short section called The Climate Story, connecting the dots between climate science and CFO decision-making. As colleague Lucy Carmody and I dug in, we were struck by the profound messages from the data. It is easy to see what the next 5 years will bring and how every business should be responding right now. The challenge? Today, it is simply more profitable in the short term to be unsustainable. Every CEO wants to deliver, quote, sustainable growth, and this has always meant steadily growing revenue and profits. Companies can deliver these results by milking outdated, extractive business models. Meanwhile, they hit snooze every time they hear about record heat, fires, floods, or droughts. Most are focused on AI and the current political winds. But achieving sustainable growth going forward will mean much more than growing revenue and profits. Failing to address the climate challenge is no longer an option. Indeed, companies are facing the greatest set of risks and opportunities in over a century. CEOs may not realize that we are at a make or break moment. I created this book to be a how-to guide for taking the next steps, to not only brace for the risks ahead, but to also thrive in the coming decades, with concrete tips no matter where your company starts from today. Fortunately, the most nimble, innovative companies have been showing the way. They scan the horizon, see the future, set their North Star, and embark on a decade-long transformation. In this podcast, my guests and I will share insights from several of these companies, and you can use what they've learned as your company reimagines its future. My guest today is Jennifer Aspen Mason, Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of J.M. Huber, a fascinating company with operations in a portfolio of industry sectors. Jennifer previously held leadership positions at Mars and Unilever, two companies that embarked on a sustainable growth transformation. Together, we'll look back at pivotal moments and share what the next 5 years will bring. So Jennifer, welcome.
Thanks, Gib. It's an honor to be here, and I absolutely loved your book. As you know already, we've been big fans of using the ESG Navigator approach to benchmark our sustainability efforts at J.M. Huber. But to have this accessible guide to attacking what can feel like to many an overwhelming and complex problem is just invaluable. I'm already planning on gifting this book to my peers and board members, maybe a bit selfishly, because it will certainly make my job easier if they understand the approach.
Well, thanks. And it's a complex problem indeed. Nobody solved it to date. Let me start with a confession. For 25 years, I was wrong about the timing of climate change. In 1997, I honestly thought we were at a tipping point. I had returned from living in Brussels, running Arthur D. Little's environmental strategy practice. European companies were on the move. The Kyoto Agreement had been signed. The CEO of BP broke ranks, acknowledging climate risk. That year, 1997, I was asked by the board of Ashland, Inc. to give a climate talk to the C-suite, which included the presidents of Ashland Oil, Ashland Chemical, Valvoline, and Arch Coal. I wasn't 2 minutes into my talk before the president of Arch Coal interrupted me, spouting, quote, data from the climate denial playbook. He continued until the talk ended, and then he immediately asked for my slides. A month later, my Arthur D. Little colleagues asked me to speak at a breakfast meeting of Houston-based CEOs. My job was to provide a 7-minute warm-up act before the keynote speaker. The topic was climate change. It was intimidating, looking at 25 Texas CEOs in 1997, including the U.S. presidents of Exxon, Chevron, and BP at the head table. Talk about entering the lion's den. It went fine, and then the host introduced the CEO of a company that would be named America's Most Innovative Company 6 years in a row by Fortune. and one of the 100 best companies to work for. His name? Ken Lay. Many of you know the rest of the Enron story. Now, Ken Lay knew climate science. He said, we know three things for sure. Number one, global energy demand is growing rapidly, and that will continue. Number two, that energy demand has steadily and significantly increased the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, exceeding all historic levels. And three, these CO2 increases were causing air temperatures to rise. And yes, he said, human-driven impacts are a key cause of rising temperatures. After he sat down at our table, I turned to the U.S. presidents of Exxon, Chevron, and BP and asked if they agreed with what Ken Lay had just said, and they all nodded yes. So three key messages from this story. Number one, more than 25 years ago, climate was a major discussion topic for CEOs of big oil and other large companies. Number two, at least some of these CEOs at the time were highly literate in climate science. And three, the Enron story, things can change very fast for large, successful companies. So Jennifer, over the past few decades, you've had a front row seat observing how several great global companies have navigated these challenges. Maybe you can provide a bit of perspective looking back, and then we will look today and look forward.
Wow, well, indeed. Looking back, I'm fortunate and grateful to have worked for three incredibly values-based companies throughout my career. I joined Unilever in 1997, and that was more than a decade before Paul Pullman took the reins and launched what became the Sustainable Living Plan. After 14 years at Unilever, I joined Mars Incorporated, another principles-based company, and then in 2018, J.M. Huber. Most of my career was as an R&D leader, but I always found myself engaged in sustainability activities. Since 2023, I've been lucky enough to focus on sustainability as my main goal, or as I say, my main gig. But innovation is always part of the job. But before I get sidetracked by innovation, which I will surely mention again, I want to mention how these companies, Unilever, Mars, and J.M. Huber, were, quote, doing sustainability, unquote, before it was a mainstream trend. Unilever launched the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, the Marine Stewardship Council. They had initiatives around helping small farmers with technology to improve their crops. And then years later, paired with Rainforest Alliance to certify Lipton tea. And meanwhile, Mars was focused on making the world a better place through health and wellness, through social issues, improving human rights in cocoa farming. And during my time at Mars, particularly in 2016, we were focused on packaging, recycling, and the circular economy. Then Huber, as a family-owned business, has long realized the link between sustaining the environment and having a thriving family-owned company for years to come. Gib, you asked why there's so little global progress on driving down fossil fuel consumption. My perspective is this is a much tougher proposition than we ever thought it would be. Climate has been a material issue, but the paths to lowering emissions have required long-term thinking and in some cases, new technologies. And it doesn't help that the world has become so polarized on this issue. Companies feel that they need to make a commitment or they need to back down. And that's why we prefer to talk about our climate aspirations at J.M. Huber as aspirations rather than as commitments. We aspire, and we will do everything in our power to have a sustainable and healthy business with net zero emissions by 2050. But we aren't sure how to get all the way there yet.
Wow. Well, we'll touch on net zero a bit later, but let's fast forward. The conversations I have with corporate leaders today are very different from the past. We've looked back a little ways. 35 years ago, CEOs asked me how to respond after disasters like Arco Chemical blowing up its Channelview, Texas chemical plant in 1990. Later, they sought guidance about public disclosure. What do we disclose publicly? More recently came compliance, especially with European standards. Sustainability has never been about compliance. It's always been about strategy. That's why today, ESG, as many have understood it, is dead, and not because of the backlash against it. Before ESG came along in 2005, sustainability meant people, planet, and profits. ESG added the key missing part, governance, but it dropped the profits. Now, speaking of profits, China is going gangbusters with a seismic shift towards clean energy. Between 2020 and 2024, China accounted for nearly 90% of global investment in manufacturing energy transition related equipment. Last year, 2024, half of the passenger vehicles sold in China were EVs or hybrids, up from only 6% in 2020. China produces 80% of the world's solar panel components, 60% of wind turbine capacity, and almost 2/3 of all electric vehicles. The country will hit peak oil consumption in a year or two. They process most of the minerals used in clean energy technologies, and they've been finding workarounds to trade barriers. Now, for perspective, in 1997, fossil fuels contributed about 82% of global energy consumption. Since then, we've seen an explosion of wind and solar, the launch of Tesla and many EV models. So guess what fossil fuels contributed globally at the end of last year? 81.5%, virtually unchanged over 25 years. The growth in renewable energy is being outpaced by the increase in global energy demand, which is largely still met by fossil fuels. In the US, we're stuck in political quicksand, and Beijing can only hope we continue to pretend that drill baby drill is a future strategy. Now, while the US government is stuck in climate quicksand, where are most US companies? Well, let's be blunt. Most are not seriously engaging with climate or sustainability in a way that reduces total global fossil fuel consumption. Many companies are doing good things for sure and have climate targets, but most design, make, and sell the same old stuff as in the past, leaving a trail of unintended consequences. And here's the rub. The era of getting away with unintended consequences is over. Climate risks are large, hardwired, and unswayed by political winds, and they are accelerating. Climate has become a pocketbook issue for many across the US, certainly those in Kirk County, Texas, scene of the horrific July 2025 flooding, or in Southern California, where earlier this year the Palisades and Eaton wildfires leveled the 50,000-person city of Altadena. Or how about the many impacted by floods in the Southeast, tornadoes in the Midwest, drought in the Southwest, fire in Hawaii, or heat waves from Alaska to Arizona and beyond. So Jennifer, given this new climate world, how do you, the J.M. Huber leadership team and board, balance the short-term pressures with the longer-term ability to thrive?
That's a great question, Gib. And in 2033, we'll be celebrating Huber's 150th birthday. To prepare for that, in 2023, we formed a team to map out what we call Vision 150, or where we aspire to be in 2033 and beyond. That vision includes being a company you're proud to tell your grandchildren about. That really captures the essence of a family-owned portfolio company with sustainability and people at the forefront. Of course, the challenge, as you say, is to balance the long-term with a shorter-term action plan. We have a 3-year financial planning cycle, which is longer than for some, but our strategic horizon needs to extend even further to meet the needs of our family stakeholders and shareholders. This is where ESG Navigator was especially helpful for us, and I know this is one of the tools you mentioned in the book. We were able to use the benchmarking tool and KPIs to prioritize where we want to invest and where we sit versus other companies. I like to say that a company's sustainability performance is like a fingerprint. No one will be the same. They're all unique. But using the tools showed us how we compared to others in the areas that were most important to us. And we were able to share those strengths and opportunities with our board to gain support for the way forward. You asked us where climate fits into our list of priorities. At Huber, we've experienced firsthand the impact of climate risks in our US and our European agricultural businesses. Whether floods in Italy or droughts in California, we, as well as our customers, have felt the business impact where it hurts. So climate as a material topic is very real for us. It's also one of the trickiest ones to solve. Even with unlimited funds, it would be impossible to buy our way to a zero emissions business that is still actually a business. There's a lot of long-term work to get there, and it will require tenacity, innovation for technologies or fuel sources that don't exist today, or are perhaps not scalable or affordable. And it will require collaboration with like-minded business and partners.
I love that. Tenacity, innovation, collaboration. Let's look ahead over the next few years. We hear a lot about companies chasing net zero by 2050. That made sense, perhaps, in 2015 when the Paris Climate Agreement was signed, but not today. The Paris Agreement was supposed to keep nations holding down global temperatures at no more than 1.5 degrees C over pre-industrial times by 2050. The problem? We reached that target 26 years early in 2024, last year. So let me share a quote that sounds like it comes from Greenpeace, but it actually comes from the CEO of a major mining company. Andrew Forrest, CEO of Fortescue, said, and I quote, "Net zero 2050 is an absolute disaster for mankind, serving only one master, the fossil fuels sector." I mentioned the climate story earlier. Anyone can view a 30-slide PDF on our website, theclimatestory.com. That's the-climate-story.com. The story walks through 8 steps, and for each summarizes long-term trends, recent trends, in the next 5 years. Step 1 is growing energy demand, and with AI, the explosion continues. Steps 2 through 5 are the direct impacts on the planet. Rising CO2 emissions lead to rising air temperatures, lead to rising ocean temperatures, lead to sea level rise. Steps 6 and 7 are the risk impacts. Increases in CO2, air and ocean temperatures, and sea levels result in more and nastier adverse weather events. That's step 6. And that leads to the insurance sector responding, which is step 7. They are quite literally at the front door of climate action. Step 8 is how capital markets are responding. If you cannot get insurance, you cannot get a mortgage. If insurers are backing out of key markets and capital is shifting, every CEO and board should ask, how do we plan for future success in a world of climate chaos? So what does the climate story mean for the rest of us? Everyone should look at the data and ask, over the next 5 years, can we foresee any way the underlying trends driving these increases might improve? The answer is no. In 1997, when Ken Lay spoke, CO2 was 364 parts per million versus pre-industrial level of 280. Today, the level of atmospheric CO2 is 425 parts per million. Air temperature rise is accelerating. The picture is not pretty. The global economy is built on a set of assumptions that no longer hold. A stable climate, unlimited resources. We all risk being blind to the destructive impacts of climate change that are just around the corner. Within the next few years, humanity needs to make a 180-degree turn. How can we continue enjoying the benefits of modernizing society while rapidly decarbonizing the global economy? Now, how do we get there? Fortunately, there's some great examples of companies that have embarked on a decade-long transformation path and show us the way. Companies like Enel, Mars, Neste, Ørsted, Marks and Spencer, Schneider Electric, Trane Technologies, and Unilever. And Jennifer, it turns out you've worked for 2 of the companies I mentioned. So looking forward, how do you and the J.M. Huber leadership team motivate and align the workforce to be the company they are proud to tell their grandchildren about?
At the end of the day, Gib, a company can't be sustainable. I mean, sustainable in every sense of the word, unless it can create long-term profitable growth while earning its license to operate, innovate, and grow. That means reducing negative impacts, especially carbon emissions. We're lucky at Huber to have patient shareholders and what we call patient capital, which can help us to balance that tension. One of the most important ways we are internalizing this challenge is by engaging our employees in this vision and their contribution to it. We're in the process of launching our 4 Generations campaign internally and also externally in our impact report, which was just published on our website. And when I say 4 generations, I don't mean the number 4. It's FOR, because Huber's actually in its 6th generation. The goal of our 4 Generations campaign is for every employee and key stakeholder to be able to understand Huber's sustainability journey through their own perspective. By internalizing what sustainability means specifically for Huber, our fingerprint, our workforce can focus their energy and ideas towards our future. 4 Generations explains all of the elements that Huber is focusing on in our sustainability program. whether it's climate aspirations or product intentions, or we also talk about our Huber Helps program, which is community philanthropy. We talk about our forestry and timberlands perspective, and also our I Belong at Huber inclusivity program. We map out all of these priorities in detail. I mentioned earlier that reaching our aspirations requires innovation and collaboration. We have a workforce full of people with ideas on these topics who are energized by making a positive contribution to the world. In 2030, 70% of the workforce will be comprised of millennials and Gen Zers. These young adults will not want to be working for a company that's making the climate worse. And more importantly, they have a valuable perspective to solve this critical problem we face.
I agree. I think the key for companies unlocking this climate challenge lies at the linkage, the connection between the board of directors and the millennial and Gen Z workers. Sustainability has never been a question of if, it has always been a question of when. The when is now. Market forces, societal trends, and resource constraints are converging at a global scale for the first time in history. That's why I wrote Navigating Sustainable Growth, to alert business to very significant risks and business opportunities. Now, I mentioned McKinsey earlier. McKinsey research proves that companies that plan and execute over a 5 to 7 year horizon significantly outperform peers by 47% over a 15-year period. So think about that. And contrast that with the very short term, often just 1 to 3 year focus of most companies. On top of that, the average tenure of CEOs has shrunk from about 8 years in 2000 to 5 years today. The median tenure of S&P 500 CEOs today is 4.8 years. All of which means the board of directors is responsible for ensuring a company is looking out over that 5 to 7 year horizon. Boards must lead the shift to a decarbonized, dematerialized economy. And that shift must begin now, not in 2030, not in 2040, not in 2050. At the outset, I said we stand at a fork in the road. Rüdiger Dornbusch, the German economist, had something to say about this, known as Dornbusch's law. And it says, the crisis takes a much longer time coming than you think, and that it happens much faster than you would have thought possible. So Jennifer, some closing thoughts and perhaps a message to the many who do not sit in the boardroom.
Well, first of all, Gib, thanks so much for inviting me to this conversation, because it has to start with conversation or we won't get to action. I would say, to answer your question, we put so much emphasis on boards, and rightfully so, because their governance and leadership will be critical. But to those outside the boardroom, I would say we need your engagement, your ideas, and your energy to protect our future. Boards need to lead a change, but the change can't happen from the boardroom alone. It will take all of our ecosystem working together to make it happen. We need multiple perspectives. We need to talk through the tension, have those conversations, and focus on what's possible and what can become possible to crack this one. My wish is for everyone to understand the climate story in your book, Gib, and to feel empowered to contribute to a sustainable future.
And that, as you said, Jennifer, is exactly how companies can attack what can feel to many an overwhelming and complex problem. In closing, Yogi Berra is credited with saying, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. A few visionary CEOs have shown the way. Paul Pullman provided the simple metric: double growth, cut your company's footprint in half. During Pullman's 10 years running Unilever, the company's shareholder returns increased by nearly 300%, outperforming competitors like Procter & Gamble and Nestle. So as the Unilever story illustrates, transitioning a company to a low-carbon business model requires action planning spanning more than 3 years. It cannot happen with a 1 to 3 year planning horizon. And therefore, boards of directors must own the climate and broader sustainability agenda. It cannot be delegated. Boards are the most important decision makers in the global economy. To own the climate agenda, directors must enhance their climate fluency. Yet among 110,000 directors globally today, fewer than 1% have professional backgrounds in sustainability or climate. Major pension fund investors are paying attention, and their voices will grow louder. So regardless of industry sector, every company must find a way to decouple growth and profitability from resource intensity. That's what the image on the book's cover illustrates. Enormous fortunes will be won and lost. High-emitting companies won't retain staff, won't leverage their balance sheet, or win in new markets. The risks are massive, but so are the opportunities. Navigating sustainable growth is a roadmap for what's ahead, sharing lessons learned from the truly transformational leaders that we've spoken about and over 300 best practice examples from 100 other global companies. So business leaders have a choice: cling to the past and hope for the best, or seize the moment, study the climate story, open the aperture to see what 2030 will likely bring, inspire your employees, and start building tomorrow's winning companies. Game on. Thanks so much, Jennifer.
Thank you, Gib.
Navigating Sustainable Growth, a roadmap for boards and corporate leaders by Gib Hedstrom is available now. Use discount code DGSustainable for 20% off when ordering via degruyterbrill.com. To learn more about the climate story, please visit www.theclimatestory.com. That's www.the-climate-story.com. This conversation presented by Vesto Audio.